Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Intentionally Act Live. My name is Dr. Atyia Martin, and founder of All Aces Inc. And we are so excited today that we have the wonderful Cymone Davis. So let me tell you a little bit about Cymone Davis, and then we'll jump right in. So Cymone Davis is the city manager of Tullahassee, Oklahoma. Excuse me, and is managing more than the revitalization of one of America's oldest Black towns, which is also started as a freedmen's town. And for folks who know about the history, these were towns that were set up after the ending of slavery officially, so that Black people would have a place to go. And some of them sprouted up during slavery as a place for folks who earned their freedom in some way, shape, or form to be able to settle and have the opportunity to build a life and build wealth and health for their families. That said, she is also founding the world's first boarding school that is dedicated to children of the African Diaspora, called Kingdom Come International. Now, Cymone is also working on documenting this whole experience through a film, a documentary film. And so we are so excited to welcome Cymone to Intentionally Act Live. And let me say this about Cymone: she is fierce, she is humble, she is powerful. And it has been a pleasure to get to know her in the short time that I have had the privilege of being able to be connected to her. And I am very grateful that she is here with us today. I'm looking forward to this conversation just as much as I think she is, based on our previous conversation. And so let's begin how we always begin, which is, Cymone, how are you doing today, for real, for real?
Dr. Martin, how am I doing today for real, for real? I feel good. I feel blessed. I feel excited. As you mentioned, I'm very humbled to be here. So thank you for this platform. Thank you for this space. I listen, sharing space with you, I feel good.
Oh, thank you so much. And I will answer that question as well. How am I doing, for real today? I am status quo Atyia today. And status quo Atyia is incredibly energized and excited and incredibly exhausted all at the same time. And so feeling, in spite of that, feeling really grateful and working really hard to make sure that the external pressures and realities and things that are happening don't dictate how I'm doing and how my day is going. So thank you for sharing how you're feeling. It's an important part of what we at All Aces refer to as collective care. And part of collective care is really about creating space for our humanity, regardless of the context, whether we're in a business meeting with a client or whether we are doing Intentionally Act Live. So thank you for that. And we will bring that thread of collective care throughout this conversation and taking care of each other and making sure we create the space for us to take care of ourselves and supporting each other in doing that. So
Snap.
that. Thank you. And so we are so grateful that our viewers are here with us as well. We know that this is going to be a lively conversation. There's going to be a lot of information. We hope that you will post, ask questions, share your thoughts. Let us know that you're here with us. Let us know where you're from. So drop that in the chat on whichever platform you happen to be watching this on, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's on YouTube, wherever you are, Periscope. Just let us know how you're doing. Let us know where you're from. And let us know why you're here with us today, because Cymone is pretty amazing. And we know that there's a reason why you tuned in today. So let us know that too. That said, let's jump right in, Cymone.
Yes.
So we introduced you as being someone who is a city manager of a town called Tullahassee, not Tallahassee, Tullahassee, y'all, Tullahassee. And so with that said, tell us a little bit more about Tallahassee, about the boarding school idea, and what was it that made you fall in love with doing this?
Wow. That's a very powerful question. And so to start off with Tallahassee. So Tallahassee, Oklahoma is the oldest surviving all-Black town in Oklahoma. It was given to the Creek freedmen in the mid to late 1800s after the Emancipation Proclamation. And we just celebrated Juneteenth. One thing I want to be mindful and share with our audience is that although Juneteenth, we celebrate 1865, it wasn't until 1866 where people, Africans, Black people, were freed in Oklahoma. So Oklahoma was not a state at the time, so they did not abide by the Emancipation Proclamation. It was still considered Indian territory. And so it wasn't until 1866, the 1866 treaty, in which the emancipation, or in which the federal government forced Native Americans to give their Creek freedmen or their freedmen land allotments along with their freedom. And so hence that's actually how Tullahassee came about. And ironically, all this is full story or full circle. Ironically, Tullahassee was created around a Black boarding school. So many people do not know that as well, but Native Americans had boarding schools in the 1800s. And so after the Civil War, this area was dilapidated. There was broken, wood and structures. And so this school wasn't really operating at that time. And once it was rebuilt at this time, they gave it to the children of the Creek freedmen. And so hence Tallahassee has so much history, and the fact that it's still around today speaks volumes. So the dream of having a Black boarding school actually came to me November 2018. And so I've been on this journey for a long time, and there's still many years to come. But I was teaching 11th and 12th grade students at a high school in Kansas City, Kansas. And I'm originally from Kansas City, Missouri. And so one night I was just praying. I'm very spiritual. And I was just like, God, like, this ain't it. Just to be point blank and period. Like, God, I'm working on my second master's. I'm in the school system. And at this point, I've been in multiple school systems, private, public, suburban, rural, urban, and it just seems as if there's not a space for the Black child to thrive in any space, in anywhere.
It's funny you mentioned that. I'm going to pause your story there, so don't forget your spot, because many folks who have ever been to a workshop, ever been to a talk, ever been to anything that I have spoken at, know that that's how I open up, right? That, my biggest lessons about racism, understanding what it is, how it works, how harmful it is, but also what in the world are we supposed to be doing about it, came from being a parent, trying to figure out how do you raise 5 Black children in a society that's not designed for them to thrive. Literally the same language, right? And part of that is because of the ideas and that they're going to expose to, that's going to be trying to mold them into what the world thinks they should be, as opposed to the possibilities of who they can be, who they really are, and what opportunities are actually available, what their potential really is. And so I just wanted to acknowledge and reinforce that idea of schools in our larger society not being quite designed for our children to thrive. So thank you for being so precise in that language. That was really really powerful. So thank you, Cymone. I'm going to be quiet now and let you finish where you were going with that.
Well, yes, and I will continue, but I also want to speak to what you just mentioned, right? Comment to what you just mentioned. And prior to the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954, way back, W.E.B. Du Bois, mentioned that, actually stated in context, we should not be integrating our school systems when it's not set up for our children to thrive. And it's actually having them enter into traumatic experiences in the education system. So if you're one of only You're having to readapt your identity. You're having to now, again, figure out survival methods, not trying to thrive. You're just trying to survive at this point. And so prior to 1954 Brown versus Board of Education, I did not know, but there were over 100 Black boarding schools in the United States. All this came about this journey to start this Black boarding school. And so back in 2018, when I was praying, I did not know that there were over 100 Black boarding schools. And now there's only 4. So not even 100 years ago. And look where we are today with the student achievement gap, with the school to prison pipeline. And so these are timely conversations, but I'm not one to sugarcoat the truth. I like to just go for it, kicking in the gut, punching in the gut. Let's get to it. Let's get to change. Let's actually get to truth and change. And I try to be mindful of not everyone is ready for the type of conversations I like to have. And so it's been a long journey of shifting mindsets, even family members, even friends. Why Black boarding school? Why? And so it's not just a dominant conversation. It's even in the private of your home to say, look at the statistics. That's why we need a Black boarding school.
And so you laid out the kind of historical context. You've laid out parts of your journey. And so that gets us to the big point of the question, which is, but what made you fall in love, though? Right? And before you answer that question and take your deep breath to go there, I want to acknowledge that Rama Abdul Rahim is watching on YouTube from Singapore. We appreciate you very much. Thank you for joining us today. And I know there are many, many other viewers who are watching, so make sure you drop that in the chat or comment section of whichever platform you happen to be watching on. And so, Cymone, so with that context, how did you fall in love with this?
Okay, Dr. Martin, you keep you asking me these questions and then you're commenting. So number one, shout out to Ma. So Rama is actually my ma from Singapore. Yes, that's my ma. Back in 2013, I lived in Singapore for 2 months, and I was with her, Ma and Pa. And so I just thank you for showing up, Ma, and listening to this. And she's part of my journey. She's part of my story to how I ended up falling in love with what I do. And I think it's freedom strategies. For me to be able to travel to Singapore, to Southeast Asia for 2 months when I was 23, working on my first master's degree, for me to travel at 16 to Europe and to see Black people. And I never knew that we were outside of the United States. For me to have these experiences and then to look around and to realize that I'm a unicorn. I'm an anomaly. My people don't experience these things at such a young age. For my parents to allow me to read, just to sit and read in my bedroom and not having to worry about the pressures from the outside world. And so when I fell in love with what I do, I would say probably at the womb. I love Black people. I love my people. I didn't realize that there was hate. So let's kind of, flip it on his belly. I didn't realize that there was a hate for my people until I was 9 years old. And my parents moved me from the suburbs or from the city to the suburbs for a better education. And I was the only Black child in my classroom. And not only was I the only Black child, I felt an unspoken rule. Don't talk to her. Don't hang with her. Don't like her. And I was just so confused. My parents didn't sit down and have that conversation you're going to be the only Black person in the suburbs for a while. They didn't have that conversation. And so it was just like, wait, why don't you like me? What did I do to you?
Mm,
Why are you asking to touch my hair? Why are you telling your parents that there's only, there's a black kid now in the class and you don't know what to do? And so it was a confusion for me. And so that then turned me on this journey of wanting to understand why people hate us in this country, why people hate us in this world. And I started to read slave narratives. So the first book I read thoroughly and understood it was Roots. I read Roots when I was like 10 by Alex Haley, and learning the how we came to this country, what we how we gathered before coming to this country, solidified a lot for my future.
mm. Thank you for sharing that. And before I provide some additional context, I want to acknowledge some more folks who are watching today. We have Carla Wilson. Thank you, Carla, for being here. Gary Lee. Thank you, Gary, for watching from DC. We appreciate you. Carl Davis. Thank you, Carl. And for all of our other folks, feel free to drop that in the chat or in the comment section of whatever platform you're on. And so I'm going to come back to this idea because I think, I used to think that racism was about hate. And what I realized, is that might be the some of the ways that it gets expressed for some people. Um, And if we frame it as hate, then it makes it harder for us to all see our role in perpetuating the system. Because if I don't hate Black people, then, then this conversation isn't about me. Or if I'm Black, right, and we're talking about this, well, this conversation doesn't have anything to do with me because we're talking about hate and I don't hate Black people. And so I bring that up because what I later realized is that people were behaving in the ways that we should probably expect them to be behaving because that's what they've been taught, right? They've been taught from movies, from music, from news, from their family, from people they trust out in the community, teachers, all types of folks who hold different status in their lives or influence in their lives, that this is how Black people are. This is what you should expect from them. Stay away from them. They're dangerous. And so there are all of these ideas that build the foundation of the infection that fuels racism, right? And then you have the more subtle things, right? And how it gets expressed. It's not, you're not good enough, Cymone. It's, oh, you must be a diversity hire, right? Which then you have to do the calculus as a person of color, as a Black person in particular, to really then dissect, well, what does that mean? Oh, they're saying that I don't belong here. Oh, they're saying that I didn't earn my spot here, that I was handed something. And so I use that context to bring us to this place of, so if we know that people don't understand history, like just the bullets you laid out for us, even in this conversation, that you learned that you didn't know, right? That most people don't know. That helps fuel these ideas, right? Because if you don't know all of this context and you don't know the ways that Black people leverage their resources and their power to support themselves and their communities throughout history in America and in other countries across the world, then again, you see them as, or you see us as, oh, they were handed things, they don't do for themselves. If they could just pull themselves up by the bootstrap, then everything would be better. And so I will land here and say thank you for sharing that very personal story about how it felt to be in a predominantly white space and be the only one, especially as a child, and trying to figure out what does that mean and why are people treating me in this way. So tell us a little bit more about how that then this love for Black people, because of the space that your parents created for you. Can you talk a little bit more about the potential tension that was there, right? So you love Black people, and then you go to this predominantly white space and you're being treated differently. How did you reconcile that as you got older?
Rhetoric.
Mm.
Rhetoric is important. Language is important. And the fact that and I love how you juxtapose love and hate, right? So there's so many nuances when it comes to racism, when it comes to race, right? Very heavy air quotes with race. And so I've learned to use my rhetoric, use the words that are coming out of my mouth in order to infuse change, infuse conversations. And I'm also, and I like to tell young people, especially because I feel like everything I do is really for youth. And I like to tell young people about like the tools of the tools of the mouth, the tools of your words. And you may feel as if you're shut out from different conversations in your own classroom, in your own groups. But do not allow that to silence your voice. Continue to speak up. And so I think that I've had many conflicting conversations where I felt as if my voice was not being heard by a teacher or by a student, and then having to reinforce that language or having to reinforce my position. And then I also believe that there's time for loneliness. And I think that we do not probably express or tell our students or tell our children that it's okay to be alone in your room just to read a book, to just think, to learn how to express yourself in multiple ways. And I felt alone in those classrooms a lot of the times. And so it then infused me to know you have to lean on yourself. You have to, I think it goes back to the conversation of growth mindset. We have the fixed mind. There's a conversation of fixed mindset versus growth mindset. And so learning the growth mindset, learning how to have your intrinsic motivation, right? So intrinsic motivation to, if things are occurring around you and you feel as you can't make change within yourself. Intrinsic motivation, motivate yourself. And so I think that it carried me to the point where at age 23, I received my first master's degree, and then my second at age 29, because I had that intrinsic motivation to say, you know what, if you don't believe in me, I know I can. Let me show you what I can do. But I want to pause here too, because you mentioned again the word hate and about the rhetoric of is deeper. And so I did not learn until graduate school, perfect transition, when I was 23. I went to HBCU at 17, and then I went to a predominantly white institution, top research institution in the United States, one of the top at age 21. And so learning about social constructs. And so what I learned in the academia space of how race is a social construct, like what is race? And so I like to, again, with my rhetoric and with my words, readapt the language. And to be honest, I like to say the only race I'm concerned with is track and field. I'm wanting to know more about economic and political power for people within the African diaspora. Let's talk about power within the African diaspora. That's what I'm focused on. I'm not focused on race. I'm focused on power.
Thank you for that. And you've said a few things, and I want to sit on this piece around power, because I think most people think of power as a unidimensional thing, like it's one dimensional, right? And power is what social scientists call traditional power, right? And that you have this official position that grants you power and authority, whether it's in an organization or government or whatever the case, that you have money and wealth, and that's what grants you power. But talk a little bit more about what you mean when you say power.
Position. What I mean by power is looking at where the Black wealth gap, looking at where the statistics show how our community is going to be positioned in the future. And I'm concerned about our African diaspora position in this world. Thinking of our education systems, going back to our education systems, and you see the student achievement gap. We know how the mass incarceration system is built upon certain bodies, certain oppressive systems. And so when I think about power, it's not something of one person having a rule or authority over someone. It's actually having conversations where we're all at the table and we have that position to pivot our stance, our community, our wealth for generations to come.
So is it fair to say that in that context, the way you're talking about power is about the ability to have decision-making power?
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
The ability to have resource power.
Yes,
is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for that. And so as y'all know that I love to do, I want to acknowledge the folks who are on. We have Cynthia who's saying hello all. Crystal is in watching from Tulsa, Oklahoma. We have Latrice who's in Indianapolis. We have Cynthia Garner from Kansas City, Kansas. We have Laura Turner Smothers who is saying, preach, Cymone. Okay, she's saying preach. So she's affirming all that you are bringing to the conversation. So thank you, Laura, for being a part of the discussion. And if other folks have ideas or thoughts, drop those in the comments or in the chat as well. And so as we, part of the advertising for this conversation was about education, and it was about the workplace, right? And so we've talked a bit about education. We've talked about the opportunities gap. I don't like calling it the what's the word they always use?
Achievement gap.
Achievement gap. Because it implies that there's something wrong with our children as opposed to something wrong with the systems in which they have been placed. But so this opportunity gap, when it comes to education, we've talked about these ideas, how they infect us and how they influence our ability to thrive as children, our children's ability to thrive. So tell me more about your experiences in the workplace. What are some of the experiences that you've had that have been most informative to why you're doing what you're doing today?
Dr. Martin. Yeah, that's a loaded question. Just to disclaimer, everyone, I like to say I've only worked 6 years of my life. And what I'm doing right now is not work. This is purpose. And so I don't consider this work. So I ended up quitting my job a year ago. And so when we talk about workplace environment and equity and spaces for Black people in workplaces, I quit my job because I felt like my voice was not being heard. And so thinking of when I first started to work, my first job was actually in Los Angeles. And I was an education consultant in Inglewood. I was volunteering in Compton, and I was working part-time for a nonprofit through LAUSD. And so I had all these positions, and I realized I was not being treated fairly. And when so the thing about Cymone,
it gets serious when someone start talking about themselves in third person. Go ahead.
Cymone is she learns tools and she readapts the tools. And so at that time I was living with someone, an elder who I love dearly, and she taught me the power of MOUs, memorandums of understanding. Okay, she taught me how to write an MOU. And to this day, I've been writing MOUs, memorandums of understanding. And so at this time in my career, I realized I was supposed to be getting benefits, and I was not getting benefits.
Mm.
And honey, at 23, I didn't realize how benefits were so serious until I wasn't getting them.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I ended up having to do, arrange a meeting with those in the nonprofit space. And it felt like, again, my voice was not being heard the way I wanted to be heard. And so I ended up fighting for my rights, you know. But the thing, again, about Cymone is she don't fight for herself without bringing people along with her. And so every time that I have left a position, which was just 2 times in the nonprofit space, I brought people with me in the MOUs, in my resignation letter. You know, it's not only about Cymone. It was, this is what I see in the position that you have created for everyone else, and I just can't live in these confines anymore. And I do a great job with what I do. I work for God. You know, everything is about purpose for me. And so I try to leave lessons behind when I do leave. Like, you can't just treat people the way that power, right? So let's go back to power. The way that power is used in this country, the way that power is used in these workplaces, no more, like no longer. And so I am trying to recreate systems of power for my people that starts at the core of freedom strategies. And so I see what's happening in the workplace. I disagree with what's happening in the workplace because people think that they have power to infuse over others, and it's not okay.
So I want to add to the framing that we've put together around power, right? So we've thus far talked about it being about decision-making, about resources, and I'm going to add action, right? Because there's something you're saying here that is critical, which is the power that we all have to do something, right? And something looks different for all of us, depending on where we are in our life, what resources we have or don't have, what support we have or don't have. And I think from a action perspective, if we're connecting the dots to organizations, we have the pattern of a lot of talking, a lot of writing, a lot of meetings, right? But not a lot of action, right? So if people are bringing, and this is kind of a, if I was a teacher, I'd do the stomp on the floor thing right now, pay attention to this, because for organizations, we actually have the ability to take more action than we actually do. And when someone is bringing to us an issue about experiences they're having in the organization, instead of us doing the default human thing of defensiveness, denial, that we actually take the opportunity to see what is my responsibility as an organization, not fault. Fault and responsibility are 2 different things. But what is my responsibility as an organization to shift the dynamics of what was happening that caused someone to have those kinds of experiences, right? So action, whether it's a policy, culture, programmatic thing, whatever the case. So then that brings me to something else you said, which is purpose. And I think, so there's 2 parts to purpose: the individual level, right? So that us as individuals have to be clear about our purpose, generally speaking, in life, right? Like that is what all of the philosophers, psychologists, success literature authors, you pick a branch, pick an avenue that you want to go down. The folks who have really looked into what helps us to thrive as human beings, purpose is one of them. And you have to decide that for yourself as an individual. And we have to decide, what does that mean in the story of racial equity and social justice? What is your purpose in the story? And for organizations, it means that we too collectively have to decide on what our purpose in this story is. What is our purpose as an organization? Not just what we do, but how we do it. And what is our role in advancing racial equity and social justice? What is our purpose in that? So I just wanted to lift up those 2 themes that keep coming up in this conversation. And the
Yeah.
last thing, oh, go ahead, finish that thought, and then I want to acknowledge a couple of folks.
Okay, perfect. So one thing I realized in organizations, and I can only speak to the nonprofit space or the nonprofit sector, but I felt personally, and I can only again speak for personal experience, but there's organizations built around fear, like fear-based organizations, right? And it's a mind thing, right? So it's like you need me, and so in order to keep your job, you have to do what I say. And there's fear around that. And then what I've realized by building this school and working in nonprofits, number one is all for me, all ordained by God for me to even be here to talk about building a nonprofit out of a school by way of working for nonprofits. And so what I realized that a lot of it depends on your board of directors. Who sits on your board? Who sits on your board of directors? Now, if you are in a nonprofit space that is majority for people of color, let's save the children, but your board of directors is majority white, come on. Like, so when we talk about rhetoric, when we talk about the strategic tools that people use, let's have more diversity on the boards. If your organization is focused on a certain group of people, that group of people should be represented. Majority should be represented on your board of directors, hands down. And so these are things that I'm learning at a young age, that I feel as if we have normalized these conversations, we would not be where we are. We would not be having continual conversations about how to do things, and it would be actionable steps. Where I'm taking actionable steps to get where we need to go. I'm not just having continual conversations.
Thank you for that, Cymone, because it brings up a major barrier for most people in owning their power to change the dynamics. It is something that we've noticed not just in the nonprofit sector, but in the for-profit sector, in government, and as well as kind of who we are as individuals and how we show up. And that big barrier is people don't understand what racism is and how it works. They don't understand some of the foundational behaviors, thinking, policies that may not be explicitly about race or gender or class or any of the kind of underestimated groups in our society, but disproportionately burden them, right? There's this opportunity that I think we keep missing because people are struggling so hard to see that dealing with issues of racism is not about policing what everybody else is doing. There's a role for that. And. What are you doing? What are you doing as an individual? What is your organization doing? What actions can can you be taking? And with when we're working with organizations, a pattern that we see is people think it's somebody else's responsibility. They think it's an extracurricular activity that, when we have time to get to it, we'll like get to that other stuff over there. They think it's about charity. Oh, we gave some money to some random nonprofit organization, and we don't know what happened with that money or if there was any actual impact, but like we did that, right? Don't we get a gold star for that? And so this pattern that you're talking about of this culture in organizations that also impacts things, this abuse of power. Because there is a power dynamic, right? Like we need jobs in order to pay our bills, and organizations have a responsibility to create environments. I mean, if they want to succeed, if you want to fail as an organization, then keep doing what you've been doing. But if you want to thrive, if you want to succeed, if you want to be sustainable, right? What the research shows is that people actually are looking for an environment where they belong. They're looking for an environment where they're respected, where they have some autonomy in doing their job, where they are able to participate in larger conversations about the direction that the organization is going in, where they have relationships, where their supervisor is providing them with regular feedback so they can continue to grow and learn in a way that's not harmful, in a way that's not about me asserting my authority and my power over you, right? And so this pattern of behavior in organizations is incredibly corrosive to advancing racial equity and social justice. And I think sometimes people, if they don't see the words race or racism or racial equity in the issue, they don't see the connection between the two, right? And the fact that that this is harmful for white people too, right? Who wants to work in an organization like that? Who wants
Anyone, right?
domineering them all day long and telling them, holding things over their head like their livelihood, right? Like nobody should have to live like that. And that dysfunction in organization disproportionately burdens people of color and Black people in organizations. And so I just wanted to go down that rabbit hole. I probably spent a little too much time on it, but I wanted to explicitly say that. And I wanted to explicitly say that you get lots of love in the chat. You have Tony Marie Talley. I hope I'm saying your name right. Who's saying they're so proud of you. Dr. Carrie is watching from Kansas City and knows and loves you and your parents and is enjoying you. Mamie Washington is affirming that she really did that, which is leave that job. We also have Elaine Fata. I hope I'm saying your name right, Elaine, who also is so proud of you and loves what you're doing. And so I just wanted to acknowledge all the folks who are sending so much love and who are really proud of what you're doing. And so which brings me to this next part. So we've talked about education, we've talked about the workplace, we've talked about the past, we started talking a little bit about today. So let's talk about the present, right? In the recent past. So in June, you led the fundraising and organizing of a big cleanup in Tullahassee. Can you tell us a little bit more about that as we're kind of connecting the dots of this thread of power, of purpose, and what it looks like to put that into action?
Yes. So we're all aware that the 100th commemoration remembrance of the Tulsa Race Massacre, we just kind of passed through that season. And there was so much conversation about the massacre. This happened 100 years ago. What are we doing now? And we didn't know about this history. We didn't know that over 300 Black bodies were killed and put into the Arkansas River, in 1921. We didn't know that, all the white mob came into this area and that there were, planes above bombing, these group of people. And we didn't know that that was the first of two times that on American soil, Black people were being bombed. So we didn't know these things, right? And now around the massacre, I kept thinking of Tallahassee, because people do not realize the lasting effects of the massacre and how it transcended the state. We're not just talking about 35 blocks within an area of Tulsa, Oklahoma. We're talking about over 100 Black towns before the 1921 massacre. Mm-hmm. Now we only have 13 Black towns in Oklahoma. So there is there's present day harm done due to the massacre. And at the same time, my first master's is in media studies. So I understand media. I love media. I understand the hypersensitilization of media. When you see certain people multiple times in a certain light, how you start to criminalize that, or how you start to believe those stereotypes or those tropes. And so I really thought about how, number one, Tallahassee is the oldest surviving Black town, how many people do not know about Tallahassee to this day, that It was created around a Black boarding school. And I thought about the needs of Tallahassee today. And we have some needs. Tallahassee, Black towns, Black townships have needs. And one of those needs was cleaning it up. Let's clean it up. And so I thought about how the media is focused on the massacre in a way where we see a lot of Black trauma in media. We see a lot of Black trauma in media. And what I want to see is Black hope. I want to see Black forwardness. I want to see Black sustainability. And I like to think backwards. And so it's like, if I want this Tallahassee to be something in 10 years, how are we going to get there tomorrow? Oh, the AJ Mason building. So the AJ Mason building is the oldest building in Tullahassee, Oklahoma. And it was built in 1912. It has served many purposes for the community. It's actually listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1985. So it's big, number one. And it has such a big presence for Tallahassee. But if you look at the AJ Mason building in the past 30 years, it's been overgrown with trees, weeds, grass, brush inside the building and outside the building. And so when I think about how we want to revitalize Tallahassee, being mindful what happened 100 years ago with the Tulsa Race Massacre, let's clean it up. Let's actually start with the cultural gem of Tallahassee. And so what we organized is a 30-day Tallahassee community cleanup. So the massacre, again, the commemoration of the massacre, May 31st was May 31st. June 1st, we in Tallahassee cleaning up. So we're mindful of what happened 100 years ago, but we're also moving to the next 100 years. We're being reflective of how we want to build for the next 100 years. And so that's what the community cleanup is about, is let's actually reshift our focus and rebuild for the next 100 years, starting with the AJ Mason building. And we have a community cleanup campaign. We have a cleanup campaign raising money for the AJ Mason building to be restored as a welcome center and a museum. And so this is going to be the cultural space that shifts the conversations, that shifts the momentum of Tallahassee.
Thank you for that, Cymone. And so one fact that we have neglected to share with our viewers today is, tell us a little bit about the basic information about Tallahassee. How many people are we talking about? Tell us about some of the annexation work that you have led. So give us a little bit more context about this amazing place.
Yes, so Tallahassee is a very spiritual, loving place. When the treaty was signed in 1866, the borders of Tallahassee extended to the Arkansas River. And we're still finding out what our original land boundary was. So we know that it was huge. We know that it was massive. And if you go to Tallahassee today, you're only really driving on one street. And so again, thinking of within 100 years, how much land has been taken out of this precious town, how many lives have had to leave out of this precious town because of lack of resources, because their school was consolidated in 1990, which was like the last hope around a community staple. And so now they have their first ever city manager. And if y'all don't know by now, I don't play. Okay. And when it comes to Black people, I don't play. And one of the things that the mayor mentioned was like annexation. We have to start annexing our land. And this is crucial because when you think about property taxes, when you think about sales tax, it's all dependent on your zip code and where you're living. Mind you, 100 years ago, I was not having these conversations. I was an educator. So talk about purpose. It does not have to be a piece of paper to say you have to do this. I'm now learning about sales tax and sewer lines and septic tanks. I did not know that's not conversations I had a year ago. But Tallahassee, the population is less than 100, and we are, as the mayor likes to say,
Wait, hold on. Less than 100 as in 100,000, or are we saying less than 100, like 100 people?
People.
100, 100, 100.
Less.
Mm-hmm.
And again, one of the 50, 60, 70 years ago, one of a staple of the community around, right? So Tallahassee was not only servicing people in the community, but Muskogee, Redbird, Porter. And so we think about the Black towns and the needs, the utopian that they offer for Black families, for Black people. And we think in 2021, there's less than 100 people who live in Tallahassee. What I focus on right now is visibility and advocacy. Visibility and advocacy. There's no one fighting on behalf of Tallahassee, so for people to know what's happening, to know for people to know what happened. I'm still learning how, and I don't want to get the context wrong or the history wrong, but as we know about lynchings in this country, Black bodies being lynched in this country. In Oklahoma, in Wagner County, where Tallahassee sits, there was a woman who was lynched in the early 1900s near Tallahassee area in Wagner County that we do not talk about today. One of the few Black women being lynched. We have Sandra Bland. We have conversations about say her name. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know this history in the backyard of this precious town. And it wasn't even her. Look up the history. So long story short.
And actually, for folks to look at the history, there's a book called 100 Years of Lynchings. And it is by Ralph Ginsberg. And that book is literally a collection of news articles about lynchings that have happened, and it brings it all the way up through the 60s, and I think it stops around the 60s. And so, this history that Cymone is mentioning has been well documented. We just didn't learn it in school. There's a lot we didn't learn in school. So sorry to jump in there, Cymone. Please continue.
No, but it's timely, right? So we are finding our own resources to figure out what happened, to learn what happened in the past. I'm learning about the Great Migration now. Mm-hmm. And again, I didn't learn that in history. And so that's a whole other conversation for a whole another day. But
yep, that's a great resource, great moment in history to learn about. The Warmth of Other Suns. Oh my goodness, Isabel Wilkerson, who also was it last year came out with the book Cast. That is a great piece around the warmth of other suns is a great piece around the Great Migration.
Yes, and so all this learning history, especially of Black people in America, going back to Tallahassee and the 13 Black towns in Oklahoma. So there's so much history that's in this state, in this town, that I'm learning as I go. And so when I think about the past and the history of Tallahassee, I'm so mindful of the community and how we're going to reshift for the future.
Thank you so much, Cymone. So we have 5 minutes left. Let me make sure I'm thinking about this right. I'm pretty sure. Yes, so we have about 5 minutes left. And so with our last 5 minutes, I know it went fast. It always does. 2 things I want to kind of make sure we land with. So this idea of so we've talked about the historical context of Black spaces and how they've been destroyed, why they were important. So with this theme of power, purpose, and action, let's land with why are they important today and what should we be doing? And while you process that question, I am going to give a shout out to Ara Nickel. I hope I'm saying her name right, who's asking, is this recorded? Yes, it is. You will be able to revisit this stream on all ACES platforms, and including YouTube. Keith Caldwell is saying that he knows you and gives you lots of love. Kayla Dix, proud of you, Cymone. So just make sure you get all of your flowers and love. And so I'm passing it over to you, Cymone. Tell us what are we doing here? Why should we be doing this?
Why? Land. Let's talk about land. Let's talk about how land is king or land is green in this country, and how land has intentionally been taken out of Black people's ownership. Yes. And so when we think about Black townships, these are ours. This is our land. These are our municipalities. It's our control. We're setting up futuristic ways for Black people to live. And it's not just a utopian dream, it's reality, it's actuality. And so that's why it's so important. And I am working for purpose because I see the future. I see if we are at a state where there's Forbes magazines or there's statistics that says that in the next 20, 30 years that the Black wealth gap or the Black wealth in America will be zero. And we're talking about collective power, again, not just individual education. That there's a problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm trying to do is curb the oppression, the suppression for our people to actually live a utopian lifestyle, to live with safe haven and happiness. And that's why it's important. Black townships, I think that is the number one conversation that we should be having today, or creating new towns, and how to set up our own municipalities through federal dollars, right? Federal dollars, state dollars. This is not just public funds. This should be coming from grants. This should be coming from philanthropists. This should be coming from those who understand the need to set up land ownership and township for Black people.
So let's put up that website one more time for TullahasseeOK.com. Please support the revitalization of Tullahassee. Support the work that Cymone is doing. For all of our folks who are in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, who are representing corporations, hook up with your corporate giving folks and make sure that they connect and contribute to what's happening in Tallahassee. This other piece, I just want to land us here, which is, you said something really powerful in the last statement you made. You said lots of powerful things, but I am going to focus on this one for how we land our time today, which is, you talked about how the action that you're taking is really meant for the future. And I want to really lift that up, because as human beings, we are not wired by default to be thinking in the longer term. It takes intentionality and proactive effort for us to identify our purpose, right? Why are we doing what we're doing, right? If we don't have purpose, we're just doing a bunch of random stuff towards random ends, right? But when we're clear about why we're doing what we're doing, then we're headed down a very clear path. And then the other question becomes, for who? For ourselves, right? Or are we talking about for next generations? Are we talking about this more longer term view? There's a quote that I used in one of our other Intentionally Act Live sessions that I'll use here, which is, and I'm remixing it because it uses like language, like old language, but really the wise and great people plant trees knowing that they will never experience its shade or their shade. And as we think about this work, advancing racial equity and social justice, part of it is that, yes, we will reap some benefits, right? Part of it is being better people, being better leaders, having more impact in people's lives because of the skills necessary to advance racial equity and social justice, and that can't be the only target on our board, right? That there's a larger target that sits within, that is about the long-term implications. And when we think about things in that way, we make different decisions and different choices about how we spend our energy, time, resources. So I just want to say thank you to you, Cymone, for lifting up all of these powerful concepts, helping us to humanize it, showing us what it looks like to practice racial equity, to surface our invisible power and turn it into action, and inspiring so many people to be able to do that as well. So we have another. Oh boy, Mayor Curran is in the building, y'all. So, Cymone, as we're going to go over a little bit, Cymone, tell us who Keisha Curran is, who is currently on Facebook posting about you. Who is Keisha Curran?
Oh my goodness, Keisha Curran. She is the reason why I'm here today, y'all. That woman is powerful. She knows how to get anybody in Tallahassee. So Keisha Curran is 5th or 6th generation Tallahassean and was on a PBS documentary called Struggle and Hope. To this day, she has not seen herself on that documentary, but she was on this documentary, and that's actually the documentary when my spirit spoke and said the school is going to be in Oklahoma. It was her face that I was watching in Kansas City, Missouri, in my apartment. And I reached out to her. I'm a researcher, y'all. So if y'all didn't realize, I'm a researcher. So I found her on Facebook and I sent her a message. And since that day that I sent her a message, she has been in my life and she has changed my life. So the work that I'm doing right now, and oh my gosh, Keisha, you about to get me emotional. But the work that I'm doing right now is because of her. So yeah, she means a lot to me.
So, Mayor Curran, thank you for taking time out of your busy day to be here with us. We're rooting for you. We're supporting you, literally and figuratively. And the one of the initiatives that that Mayor Curran is a part of, that Cymone helped to facilitate, is actually called Mayors Organized for Race and Equity. So let's end by just talking a little bit about that, since Mayor Curran has graced us with her presence.
Yes. And so I'm so excited for Mayor Curran to be part of this national coalition. And it's co-founded by the mayor of Los Angeles, Mayor Eric Garcetti. And so he reached out, or their office reached out. I would say it was May. So it was so interesting how so much stuff has quickly happened for Tallahassee. But they asked if the Mayor Curran wanted to be involved with the More Coalition. And they announced they had a virtual event, that Juneteenth weekend. And here we are today. So the More Coalition stands for Mayors Organized for Reparations and Equity. And there's 3 things that each mayor commits to on this coalition. And there's 11 U.S. mayors who sits on this coalition. And so for the fact that Keisha has been selected, or Mayor Curran has been selected to sit on this coalition, it's monumental. It's huge. And so out of the 11 U.S. mayors, we have mayors from the mayor from Denver, the mayor from Kansas City, the mayor from Sacramento, the mayor from Rhode Island, the mayor from North Carolina, the mayor from Austin, and then the mayor of Tallahassee. I just get a kick out of it. And so the 3 things that the mayors commit to: one is supporting Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee and HR 40, so House Resolution 40. The second is to form an advisory commission in our respective cities or states to help the mayor understand reparations in a way moving forward. So what are some pilot programs? What are some private and public funds that we can creatively use to look at initiatives for reparations? And then number 3, once those funding has been implemented or has been found, let's start building. Let's start actually having programs and initiatives around reparations and equity. And so we're really excited for Mayor Curran to be on this coalition. She's making history. You know, Tallahassee's making history. And I'm telling you, it's only the beginning.
Thank you for that. And, you know, we are over, and I thought it was really important for us to go over. I think for our viewers, there's a lot of debate about reparations. There's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding. I highly recommend folks take some time to learn about the broad spectrum of what reparations means, as well as I encourage Black people and other people of color to really take a look at the ways that we have worked hard to get our own reparations, right? And that it's not about a handout. And I think part of this really is about not being a handout, but being a return on investment that we never received.
Hello?
Right?
I'm sorry.
So I want to be really explicit about that. This is not a handout. This is not about favors. This is not about entitlements. This is about a lack of return on investment and us correcting the fact that the foundation of this country is built on the backs of Native Americans, and in this context, Africans who are now African Americans or Black. Some of us like to be called different things. This gets to, I won't go down this rabbit hole of language. We get caught up in language sometimes. What's the right word? But at any rate, but this whole piece around making sure that we understand that the foundation of our economy, from the infrastructure, from railroads to buildings to so much that you can't even imagine, was founded in a way where no Black people got a return on their investment in this country. That's what reparations is about. And it's not just about the money. It's also about the fact that there hasn't been a full reconciling and an acknowledgement, a shared narrative in this country. So I just want to put that out there. The acknowledgement hasn't quite happened. We're still debating on whether or not we deserve our return on investment. And it's also about overall racial equity. It's about not just repairing the past, but also how we move forward and learn from those lessons so that we can stop repeating things that don't work for us collectively.
And to close all that out, I definitely want to say it's about power. Because if we have Africans have political and economic power, the conversations will look a lot different from what they do now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Yes. So power, remember y'all, power, purpose,
And
right? Action. And there was another word we used. Purpose, action.
I thought it was purpose, power, purpose, action.
Okay, maybe that's what it was. And that we talked about it being about decision-making, resources, and action. Yes, that's what it was. I had three in my head. I'm like, there's three. Okay, got it. So thank you so much, Cymone. This has been amazing. Thank you for all of our viewers. And thank you for hanging in there with us for these extra minutes, these extra 10 minutes. Thank you, Mayor Curran, for joining us today. And thank you, Lorena, for sending us some love. We appreciate you. We appreciate all of you. As always, sending lots of love, hope, and intentional action to each and every one of you as individuals, to all of your organizations. And we look forward to seeing you on the next Intentionally Act Live. Support TallahasseeOK.com, y'all. Take care. Have a great rest of your day.